In the heart of Normandy, the imposing silhouette of the Château Gaillard dominates the River Seine. In the Middle Ages, this mythical fortress was the scene of a confrontation between two enemy kingdoms, France and England.
Chateau Gaillard is the most splendid castle in Western Europe, without any question.
There's no other chateau to equal it in the whole area.
Château Gaillard was more than a fortress. It was the emblem of the might of Richard the Lionheart, the powerful king of England.
Gaillard means sturdy, strong.
That word is very potent. It means strong or tough.
Chateau Gaillard is saying, just try to get me.
In record time, Richard the Lionheart's men would build a gigantic military enclosure whose architecture was revolutionary and which had incredible defense mechanisms.
Chateau Gaillard is like an onion. It has all these layers of fortification.
It's very advanced and hugely costly because it's the most modern technology applied to castle building at the time.
There it was, the most perfect castle that had ever been built. How on earth could it ever be taken?
If Philippe Auguste, King of France, wanted to conquer Normandy, he had to confront this stone monster. And he and his men took up the challenge.
Richard the Lionheart explained to him that the fortress was impregnable. But Philippe Auguste said that even if it was made of steel, he'd take it. To which Richard replied that even if it was made of butter, he could defend it. And there you have the whole spirit of this simply amazing castle.
For 7 long months, Chateau Gaillard lived through one of the longest and most tragic sieges of the Middle Ages.
Chateau Gaillard, of course, has these additional brutalities of the population being forced to starve between the army lines.
They had nothing to eat. They could pick a few bits of vegetation from the rocks, there wasn't much of that, and they were very quickly starving or dying of exposure.
How was this incredible castle built? How did one of the longest sieges of the Middle Ages unfold? And who won the Battle of Château Gaillard, the French or the English? This is the story of a pitiless war, the history of a fortress they said was impregnable. In the heart of Normandy, 65 miles west of Paris, the ruins of Château Gaillard look out majestically from over 300 feet above the meandering River Seine. For more than 800 years, from atop its rocky spur, it has watched over the town of Les Andelys. The ruins of Château Gaillard still bear the scars of its troubled history. A story that began in the 12th century in a divided Europe. At that time, France was the scene of a pitiless territorial struggle. There were 2 opposing camps, the French and the English. Richard I, or Richard the Lionheart, had ruled England since 1189. As the Duke of Normandy, as well as of other principal duchies of France, he controlled a large part of the country.
He was a very impressive individual. He was handsome and charming and intelligent and a wonderful soldier. He was a great strategist and a great commander in battle.
When he asked his soldiers to take risks which might lead to them being wounded or being killed, these were risks he took himself.
A man who certainly made a name for himself, and of course for contemporaries, he was the model of what a good king should be.
As the head of the most powerful dukedom in France, Richard the Lionheart represented a permanent menace to the territories of the man to whom he was both a vassal and a sworn enemy, Philippe Auguste. Philip Auguste had been King of France for over 10 years.
This was the man who really created a French empire, rather like the Roman Emperor Augustus.
He's not an inspirational leader of men, but nonetheless, he is an outstanding general, one of the most successful commanders of the Middle Ages.
At the time he came to power, Philip Auguste governed only a modest principality, consisting of Paris and its surrounding area and a zone that reached as far as Bourges. But although the king of the Franks feared Richard the Lionheart's strength, he was determined not to give up an inch of his territory to his enemy. He was a French David standing up to the English Goliath.
Richard would deliberately provoke Philip Augustus, challenging him to a duel, a one-man-to-man, one-to-one duel, knowing that Philip would decline because he couldn't match Richard's martial ability. So it was designed to humiliate Philip. So they didn't like each other, they were enemies.
Philip Auguste dreamed of crushing his enemy, and he dreamed of a French kingdom that reached as far as the Normandy coast. A showdown was inevitable, and Richard was ready and waiting. Battle commenced. But very quickly, the two men were forced to bring their hostilities to an end by a higher authority, the Pope. In 1190, Pope Clement III demanded that Richard the Lionheart and Philip Auguste call a truce and leave together hand in hand on a crusade to the Holy Land.
For the sake of Christianity, they put aside their differences temporarily to put on a unified face to go and try and recover Jerusalem.
But their partnership only lasted for a while. While Richard the Lionheart kept on fighting battles, his rival Philippe Auguste suddenly hurried back to France, claiming a mysterious illness. In a spectacularly treacherous move, he took advantage of his rival's absence to launch an offensive to capture Normandy. Once back from his crusade, Richard the Lionheart sought vengeance. The war started again. But after 4 years of fierce combat, pressure from the church forced them to make a new truce. On the 15th of January 1196, they signed a peace agreement, the Treaty of Gaillard. Philip Auguste held on to a part of his Norman conquests, the strongholds of Nonancourt, Ivry, Neumarché, Passy, Vernon, and Gaillon. In exchange, Richard the Lionheart was given the Berry-Aquitaine region and other fortified sites. At first sight, it was Philip Auguste who emerged the winner from this compromise. He'd managed to extend his realm to the west. But the King of England backed off. This semblance of peace enabled him to gain some time he needed to build his most redoubtable weapon, Chateau Gaillard. For if he wished to protect his territory, he had imperatively to bar to the French the route to the Seine and to the sea. The site at Les Andelys seemed the perfect place to build his new fortress.
We know of one instance where he clearly directs that a castle be built in a particular place because he understood that it was very strong. And I think we can certainly imagine Richard I going along and saying, I want a castle there.
It overlooks a bend in the Seine that's dominated by cliffs. And there are little islands in the middle of the river, so it's a site that's easy to fortify.
There are valleys enclosing it, and it commands the whole landscape for miles around. You can see for miles around. There's the river directly below you.
So much of the riches of the world at that time are transported by water transport, river and sea transport. It does mean that there are focal points, the ports, at which he can collect customs and control movable wealth.
This bend in the Seine was the perfect place to block Philip Auguste and his armies. But the exceptional site belonged to the church, and the Treaty of Gaillard stipulated clearly that Les Andelys must remain neutral.
For Les Andelys it shall be thus. Neither Monseigneur King of France nor we the English shall reclaim it either fief or property. Les Andelys may not be fortified.
But nothing, least of all a treaty, would prevent Richard the Lionheart from building his castle right there. He therefore came to a financial compromise with the church and obtained authorization to build his castle. The trap was closing on the French. At Chateau Gaillard, the English king could build a defense system on a scale never before seen that extended far beyond the confines of the future castle. Near to Cléry, to Tony, and on the Île aux Bœufs, there were outposts to look out for the approaching enemy, slow him down, and above all, alert the men stationed at Château Gaillard. On the riverbed at the approach to Les Andelys, Richard erected a stockade, 3 rows of wooden posts joined together by heavy chain.
Across the river, there was a stockade built across to stop the ships coming down. So it's to regulate ships coming down the Seine.
The real fortification work began on the island. Richard the Lionheart made his residence there, the Château de Lille. He built a bridge over the Seine that linked on one side the peninsula of Bernières and on the other a small fortified agglomeration called La Culture. Still to be built was the centerpiece of this impressive defense system, Château Gaillard itself. All eyes were now turned to the limestone cliff that loomed over the Seine. It looked like the ideal place to build the most redoubtable fortress of its day.
It was probably totally virgin land that they prepared to build the castle on. First they leveled it, then they dug ditches all around it.
There was also work done to make the cliff even steeper by removing any outcrops of fallen rocks.
And they would build a castle of absolutely astonishing proportions.
Richard the Lionheart envisaged a powerful-looking fortress of enormous dimensions.
Well, these buildings are vastly expensive to construct.
Such vast military works swallowed up much of the Kingdom of England's wealth. Richard the Lionheart needed his people's support if he was to finance his gigantic enterprise. So he increased both customs duties and taxes.
You need to get together huge workforces. There are skilled labourers and there are rough labourers. You can get your rough labourers anywhere, but your skilled workforce needs to be brought in numbers from other places.
Estimates reckon it cost something like £12,000, whereas for the whole of Richard's reign, on all the castles under his rule, he spent a total of £7,000. So that opposed to £12,000 on one castle.
It's proof that he has power, because that doesn't happen if you don't have money and the authority to force people to work for you.
Constructing an enclosure like this wasn't easy, especially since Richard was determined it should be built with lightning speed. So thousands of craftsmen, volunteers or pressed into service, flooded in from all over the kingdom.